In the small town of Columbus, Ohio, in the early 1990s, life flowed smoothly. The streets of the working-class neighborhood, where low-income families lived, were filled with the sounds of children's laughter, neighbors' conversations, and passing cars. Among these houses, in a modest one-story building, lived two brothers, James and Marcus Wilson. Both were young, ambitious, and, at first glance, did not stand out among the other residents. James, the elder, worked as a mechanic at a local auto repair shop, and Marcus, the younger, was just starting out, working part-time at a supermarket. Their family was well known in the area. Their mother, Esther, raised her sons alone after the death of her husband, and neighbors spoke of her with respect. But behind the closed doors of the Wilson home, something was happening that none of the neighbors suspected. The secret relationship that connected the brothers went beyond the usual family ties. This relationship, hidden from the eyes of others, began to destroy their lives over time, leading to conflicts that no one could have foreseen. In 1993, one event forever changed the fate of the Wilson family, leaving behind questions that still have no clear answers. This story began with small things, omissions, glances, accidental touches, but ended in tragedy that shook the entire city. Columbus in the early 1990s was a typical mid-sized American city. The economy was in a recessionary slump, and many working-class residents, including the Wilsons, were struggling financially. Esther Wilson, the mother of James and Marcus, worked two jobs, during the day at a laundromat and in the evenings as a cleaner at an office building. Her sons, who were 26 and 22 at the time of the events, tried to help their mother, but their incomes were modest. James, the eldest brother, was known as a hard worker and a quiet man. He spent most of his time at an auto repair shop, where he fixed old cars, and in his spare time he fixed up neighbors' cars for a small fee. Marcus, on the other hand, was more outgoing. He dreamed of a better life, often talking about how he would one day move to the big city, but for now he was content with a part-time job at a local supermarket. The Wilson family lived in a small house on the edge of the Hilltop neighborhood, which was not considered the most prosperous in Columbus. Neighbors knew them as friendly but reserved people. Esther rarely invited guests, and the brothers, despite the differences in their characters, always stuck together. Their home was modest: 2 bedrooms, a living room with a shabby sofa, a kitchen with peeling paint on the walls. From the outside, everything looked normal, but inside the family, tensions began to mount that no one spoke about out loud. James and Marcus, despite their closeness, often argued. The neighbors sometimes heard their loud arguments, but no one paid attention to it. After all, brothers do things. However, the arguments became more frequent, especially after Marcus began to spend more time at home instead of looking for new work opportunities. James, as the eldest, felt responsible for the family and often reproached his brother for inaction. These conflicts, at first glance, were domestic, but they hid deeper problems that no one around noticed. In 1992, a new circumstance entered the brothers' lives. Marcus met a girl named Letitia, who worked at a nearby cafe. They began dating, and Marcus began to disappear from home more often. James, on the other hand, remained alone, spending his evenings in the garage or in his room. Neighbors noticed that he had become even more withdrawn, but attributed it to fatigue from work. No one suspected that the relationship between the brothers had begun to change, acquiring a character that went beyond the usual family dynamics. Esther, absorbed in her own concerns, did not notice these changes. She was too busy to delve into the details of her sons' lives. However, an atmosphere began to form in the Wilson home in which unspoken and hidden emotions became increasingly noticeable. In the evenings, when Esther returned from work, she sometimes noticed that her sons avoided talking to each other, but she did not attach any importance to this. She believed that these were temporary difficulties that would soon pass. In the spring of 1993, minor incidents began to occur in the Hilltop neighborhood: carjackings, fights at local bars. The Columbus police increased their patrols, but these events did not directly affect the Wilson family. However, tensions continued to mount in their home. Marcus was staying home more and more, and his relationship with Letitia was becoming increasingly unstable. James, for his part, began to show irritation that had previously gone unnoticed. Neighbors began to whisper that something was going on in the Wilson house, but no one knew what. By the summer of 1993, the atmosphere in the Wilson household had become even more tense. James and Marcus, despite their outward closeness, began to drift apart. Neighbors noticed that the brothers rarely appeared together on the street, as they had before. Marcus, who had often talked about his plans to leave Columbus, now spent more time at home, often locking himself in his room. James, on the other hand, began to stay late at the auto repair shop, returning home after his mother and brother had already gone to bed. Esther, exhausted by work, did not delve into the details of their behavior, believing that her sons were simply going through ordinary life difficulties. However, behind closed doors, something was happening that no one around them could suspect. The relationship between James and Marcus was beginning to take on a hidden, personal character. These moments took place in secret, when Esther was at work or sleeping. The brothers avoided talking about it even among themselves, but their interactions became more intense, causing internal conflict for both. Marcus, who was trying to build a relationship with Letitia, increasingly snapped at her and then returned home to find James waiting for him. These events went unnoticed by others, but the first signs of serious discord began to appear in the Wilson household. Marcus's girlfriend, Letitia, began to notice changes in his behavior. She told her friends that Marcus had become irritable and evasive. Their meetings, which had once been regular, were becoming less frequent. Letitia tried to talk to Marcus, but he brushed her off, citing fatigue or problems at work. In reality, Marcus was spending more and more time at home, where his relationship with James was becoming increasingly difficult. James, in turn, began to display possessive traits, which only increased the tension. He rarely talked about his feelings, but his behavior, long glances, sharp remarks, betrayed his inner turmoil. At the same time, petty crime continued in the Hilltop neighborhood. The Columbus police increased their presence in the area, but this did not affect the Wilson family. However, strange incidents began to occur in their home. Neighbors noticed that loud noises similar to an argument were sometimes heard from the house, but no one dared to intervene. Esther, returning home, sometimes found her sons in a silent confrontation, but did not attach any importance to it, believing that these were ordinary brotherly disagreements. By August 1993, the situation had escalated. Marcus had finally broken up with Letitia, which came as a surprise to their mutual friends. Letitia tried to find out the reason, but Marcus avoided her. After the breakup, he became even more withdrawn, spending almost all his time at home. James, on the contrary, began to show aggression, which was unusual for him. Neighbors noticed that he became more abrupt in conversations and often looked tired. At the auto repair shop where James worked, colleagues noted that he became less focused, sometimes making mistakes at work. Esther, despite her busy schedule, began to suspect that something was going on between her sons. She tried to talk to them, but both avoided talking. An atmosphere of understatement settled in the Wilson household, where each avoided discussing what was really going on. This silence only increased the internal pressure that was building between the brothers. By September 1993, the situation in the Wilson household had become almost unbearable. James and Marcus, previously close, now barely spoke to each other. Their few interactions often ended in harsh words or the silent departure of one of the brothers. Esther, despite her exhaustion from work, began to notice that her sons were avoiding her questions about what was going on. She tried to restore peace in the family, but her efforts were in vain. The home that had once been a refuge for her now seemed full of hidden conflicts. Marcus, after his breakup with Letitia, hardly left the house. He quit his job at the supermarket, citing a desire to find a better job, but instead spent his days in his room. Neighbors noticed that he began to appear outside less often, and when he did, he seemed depressed. James, on the other hand, began to spend even more time in the auto repair shop. His colleagues noted that he often came to work sleep-deprived, and his mood became unpredictable. Sometimes he would break down into petty remarks, which was unusual for him. At this time, the brothers' relationship reached a new level of complexity. Their secret moments, which had previously taken place in secret, were now accompanied by open quarrels. These conflicts remained hidden from Esther and the neighbors, but physical signs of tension began to appear in the Wilson home: a broken chair, cracked dishes. Esther, having discovered these things, questioned her sons, but they brushed them off, referring to coincidences. She did not insist, but her anxiety grew. Meanwhile, minor incidents continued in the Hilltop neighborhood. The police increased their patrols, but this did not affect the Wilson family. However, the atmosphere in their home was becoming increasingly difficult. Neighbors began to notice that James and Marcus stopped greeting them as they used to. One of the neighbors, an elderly Mr. Thompson, once heard a loud argument coming from their home, but did not intervene, deciding that it was a family matter. By the end of September, Marcus was showing signs of restlessness. He called Letitia several times, trying to reconnect, but she refused to talk to him. These failures only made him more withdrawn. James, for his part, became even more abrasive. His co-workers at the body shop began avoiding him, fearing his outbursts. Esther, feeling out of control, tried to organize a family dinner, but her sons refused, citing their busy schedules. There was a growing sense in the Wilson household that something was going to happen. Esther, despite her busy schedule, began to suspect that her sons' problems ran deeper than she had thought. She didn't know how to approach the situation and continued to hope that everything would resolve itself. By October 1993, tensions had reached a fever pitch in the Wilson household. James and Marcus had virtually stopped communicating, avoiding even casual encounters in the common rooms. Esther, who was still trying to maintain a semblance of family unity, began to notice that her sons were behaving as if they lived in different worlds. She repeatedly tried to talk to each of them individually, but James responded in monosyllables and Marcus simply avoided the conversation. The home that had once been a place of comfort now felt alien. Marcus, staying at home most of the time, became even more withdrawn. He stopped answering calls from friends and avoided all contact with the outside world. His room, usually neat, was now a mess, things scattered around, empty soda bottles, an unmade bed. Neighbors who occasionally saw him through the window noticed that he looked tired and absent-minded. At the same time, Marcus began to show an interest in old family photographs, often looking at them alone. Esther, catching him doing this, tried to ask what was going on, but he just waved her off. James, on the other hand, began spending even more time away from home. He took on extra shifts at the auto shop, returning late at night. Colleagues noticed that he became even more irritable, sometimes withdrawing into himself in the middle of a conversation. One of his colleagues, Mike, once asked if he was okay, but James abruptly ended the conversation. On the rare occasions when he was home, he avoided Marcus, preferring to stay in the garage or his room. Esther began to suspect that there was a serious conflict between her sons, but she could not understand the cause. Around this time, vandalism began to increase in the Hilltop neighborhood. The Columbus police increased their patrols, but these events did not directly affect the Wilson family. However, increasingly disturbing incidents began to occur in their home. One day, Esther returned from work to find a broken mirror in the living room. Neither James nor Marcus could explain how this happened. Neighbors also began to notice strange things. One of them, Mrs. Clark, said that she saw James throw something in the trash late at night, but she could not see what it was. By mid-October, the brothers' relationship had reached a point where any interaction ended in open conflict. One day, Esther was at home when she heard a loud argument coming from Marcus's room. She knocked on the door, but the boys fell silent, and then James quickly left the house. Esther, feeling helpless, decided not to intervene, hoping the situation would resolve itself. However, her intuition told her that something serious was brewing. On the evening of October 15, 1993, an event occurred in the Wilson home that changed everything. Esther was on the night shift, and James and Marcus were home alone. Neighbors later reported hearing loud noises that sounded like screams, but no one dared to check what was going on. The next morning, one of the brothers had disappeared, leaving traces in the house that the police later discovered. On the morning of October 16, 1993, Esther Wilson returned home from her night shift and immediately sensed that something was wrong. Marcus's door was ajar and he was missing. James also did not answer when she called him. In the living room, Esther noticed signs of disorder: an overturned chair, scattered papers, and stains on the carpet that she initially assumed were dirt. Concerned, she walked around the house but could not find either of her sons. In a panic, Esther called the Columbus police, reporting her sons missing. The police arrived an hour later. An initial search of the house revealed disturbing details. Stains on the carpet turned out to be blood, and in Marcus's room they found signs of a struggle, a broken lamp and scattered items. The detectives leading the case began questioning neighbors. Mrs. Clark, who lived across the street, said she had heard loud noises coming from the Wilsons' house the night before, but had not dared to check. Another neighbor, Mr. Thompson, confirmed that he had seen James late at night near the bin, but did not know what he had thrown out. The police searched the bin and found a bloody rag, which was later sent for examination. By midday, police had issued a warrant for James and Marcus. Detectives suspected that there had been a serious altercation in the house, but the lack of bodies and obvious evidence made the investigation difficult. Esther, shaken by the events, told police about the tension between her sons, but could not pinpoint a specific reason for their arguments. She mentioned that the brothers had been acting strangely in recent months, but did not go into detail because she did not know what was going on. 2 days later, on October 18th, police received a report of a body found in an abandoned park on the outskirts of Columbus. It was Marcus. He was discovered by a local man walking his dog. The medical examiner determined that Marcus had suffered several injuries that were incompatible with life, but the exact circumstances of the incident remained unclear. Police focused their efforts on finding James, who is now considered the prime suspect. James was found in a motel in a neighboring state on October 20th. He offered no resistance to arrest and refused to testify without an attorney. He was reserved during interrogations but did not deny being in the house the night of the incident. His attorney claimed James had acted in a state of passion but would not provide details. Police collected evidence, including blood tests and statements from neighbors, that confirmed there had been an altercation at the Wilson home. The trial began in March 1994. The prosecution accused James of intentionally causing harm, resulting in the death of Marcus. Esther, who was present at the hearings, was devastated by the loss of both her sons, one physically, the other emotionally. The trial lasted several months, and James was eventually found guilty. He was sentenced to a long prison term. The investigation never revealed all the details of what happened between the brothers. Esther left Columbus shortly after the trial, unable to remain in the house where the tragedy occurred. Neighbors discussed the incident for a long time, but over time, the Wilson family story became one of many in the chronicle of crime events in Hilltop.